So if the most negative thing we've done is build a nuclear bomb, why are we not envisioning what the most positive thing could be? Imagine a world full of people that are planting trees whose shade they'll never sit underneath. I mean, that's where we need to get to. And I believe technology can play a role in that. We have a pretty good sense that we've destroyed 50% of Earth's forests over the last 10,000 years. So we're about 50% less trees than we had 10,000 years ago. Earth will go on with or without us. I think that's the thing that people need to know. It'll just reboot and do it again. When I first got involved in permaculture, I was definitely an environmentalist. I was an activist. I was mad at the world. I was mad at big corporate America and all of these things going on. It was such a, I was a victim. At the end of the day, I was a victim. And
I remember, sorry, it just reminds me when you say this. I remember there's a YouTube video of you like gorilla planting a tree back in the.
yeah,
That is a kind of activism that I can support, man.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob. Good to see you, man. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So every time we meet someone new on the podcast, when we try and get a sense of like what their motivations are and what's their why, that's like where we always kick things off. So I'm curious. I wonder if you could, what's your why? Tell us a bit about what motivates you as a builder.
Well, I'll probably go back to when I was 7 years old. I ended up at the Vancouver Zoo, and there was a display, a television basically showing the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. It was just the most devastating thing it's one of my earliest memories, actually. And I remember asking my mom if we could write the prime minister to ask him to stop the destruction of the rainforest because of all the repercussions of destroying such an important system in Earth's ecosphere, I guess. And I did. I wrote the prime minister. I got a response back from him. Obviously, the Canadian prime minister doesn't have a lot of agency over what happens in Brazil, but that was kind of the early start of my kind of environmental roots. And then, largely just lived a really incredible childhood. We had a forest outside of our backyard and spent most of my time running around in the forest. And then fast forward, my parents were always in the industrial food industry. So my dad had multiple multi-million-dollar food enterprises, factories. And the last big factory that he had was in Edmonton. We moved from Vancouver to Edmonton in Alberta, central Alberta. We built a 40,000 square foot facility. We're doing about $25 million a year in Cheesecake. And so I grew up in industrial food. Like I watched the cheesecakes move through kilometers of pipe. And at first it didn't really faze me, but as I kind of became more conscious, it's interesting now that I have teenagers watching them in the dream state that they're in till, their late teens. As my dream state disappeared and I started realizing that I was eating food going through kilometers of pipe, I started questioning the systems that I just considered to be normal as a kid. I went into mechanical engineering. The main jobs in Alberta, because we're the Texas of the North, is in the oil and gas industry. So I moved from industrial food to industrial energy. I was the guy bringing in massive amounts of natural gas into various facilities that we were designing and tearing down huge amounts of forest, ironically. My very roots, I ended up doing the thing that I was really concerned about at 7. And I was getting ready to cut down a massive swath of forest to bring in a new pipeline. And I ended up seeing this video from Jeff Lawton, a permaculture designer from Australia, who had regenerated this meaningless piece of land in the Dead Sea Valley, hypersaline soils, lowest place on Earth, very little rainfall. And as he was building forests, I was cutting them down. And it was just very ironic that this had come just as I was getting ready to pull the trigger on this massive swath of forest. And yet in the background, I felt incredible cognitive dissonance because how can I criticize the very industry that I'm supporting as a consumer? I'm heating my house with natural gas, I'm driving to work with fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have created so much opportunity in our society. I can fly to you. Literally, I could hop on an airplane tonight and be there tomorrow morning. Like, that's amazing. Whereas where I live right now on my farm, if I wanted to get to Edmonton 150 years ago, would it be a 3-day walk? Just think about the scale of change that we've seen in the last 150 years as a result of fossil fuels. So we ended up quitting our jobs after I watched that video. Both my wife and I. She was also a petroleum engineer, and we wanted to seek a different narrative. And so we traveled to Denmark, we traveled to Germany, we traveled to Northern Africa, Central Africa, Australia. We converted a Volkswagen van to run on vegetable oil. We traveled through Canada, the United States, and Mexico in that Volkswagen van, trying to find different narratives, trying to find how other civilizations or societies had solved the energy, food, and water nexus and problems that exist in our culture today. And what we found was that every culture had their own set of problems. They were different than ours. Like Denmark, for example, was forced with either moving towards nuclear or inventing the wind industry. And they chose as a country to invent the wind industry. So Vestas was born out of the 1970s oil crisis that the world had to deal with. And so one of the best parts about fossil fuels, it allows us to travel to other societies and see how different people have solved different problems under different constraints. From there, we started Verge Permaculture. We've taught close to 10,000 people regenerative design around the world over the last, from 2008 onwards. And then 2020, Fifth World was born, which is a slightly different mission than our education company, which I think we're going to get to. And so that brings us up to today. So I've been teaching permaculture and regenerative design and doing consulting for close to 15 years, I guess. And then before that, oil and gas. And before that, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in cake factories.
Nice. So even back in the early days, like your relationship with where food comes from was a big driving factor here.
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote about that today, actually. I mean, I'm super grateful for industrial food, just like I am for industrial energy. I don't grow all of my own food yet. And so I still do need to rely on those systems from time to time. Actually, still weekly. I still buy the things that I don't grow on my farm from that system. And so it's really easy for us to be activists and blame all of our problems and be actually victims at the end of the day, and not be grateful for what those systems have actually facilitated. They've opened up opportunities for humans to express themselves in ways that would not have been possible had we not, had Henry Ford not actually created the division of labor. And so I grew up in, I don't know what you want to call it, but a late stage version of Henry Ford's insight. I mean, I was the guy that putting cherries on the cake. That was my job for 8 hours a day for one part of my career at the cake factory. And understanding, even, I was listening to Naval Ravikant's podcast recently on how to get rich. And he's like, there's 5 ways to scale. It's like labor, capital, manufacturing, code, and media. And so having grown up in a factory that's manufacturing, media, I've had a lot of experience with, just with Verge and teaching and all the YouTube videos that I've created. Now Fifth World's, got some capital to play with so that we can actually experiment with different ways of kind of getting into the regen space. I think we're going to talk a little bit about code, because we've experimented a little bit with software. And it's kind of interesting to kind of have been in those different spaces and amalgamate those into the work that we're doing today.
So for those who are kind of new, you mentioned there like the regen space, and you talked also about like systems, and I get a sense that systems design and system thinking is really a key part of your work and your motivation, like understanding systems and building systems. I wonder if we can bring this term like that's really important in the VDAO ecosystem about antifragility. From your point of view, as like an expert in systems design and systems thinking, like what does this term mean? What is an antifragile system, and how would you define it?
I mean, obviously the word is a bit jargony. It was originally coined by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's written several books that are very difficult to read. I'd recommend listening to them. And because he's such a flaneur, um, he loves to let everybody know how intelligent he is. And so if you're going to read his work on specifically on the book Antifragile, which is where the term he really explores that term, there's a book I recommend reading first, which is The Bed of Procrustes, which basically gives definitions to all the aphorisms that he constantly refers to in that book. And if you don't understand the aphorisms, then the book won't make a lot of sense. You'll have to end up reading it twice. I wish that somebody had told me that before I read it. But the easiest way to explain anti-fragility is to use some personal examples. So I think the word fragile is pretty easy to understand. If I was shipping a wine glass to Germany, I would put a label on there that said fragile, handle with care. We've all seen that label and it makes sense. And so we can define fragility as a system that is harmed by volatility. So when you apply volatility to a fragile system, it breaks. And so then the next thing that comes after fragile is resilience. And so in the ecological world, resilience is actually their version of anti-fragile. But Nassim says that we need more granularity to describe our systems than just referring to resilient systems as anti-fragile systems. So there's three basic states that we're going to go through. So resilience is the next one. And the best way to think about a resilient system is one that resists volatility. So a sidewalk is a great example of that. A sidewalk is used for walking on, and if I take a hammer and I hit the curb on the sidewalk really hard, that curb will chip. If I do it long enough, it'll keep chipping, but the sidewalk is still functional as a sidewalk, even with the chip. If we want to get into the physics of it, resilient systems will degrade over time and basically increase in entropy, so in disorder, as it is subject to volatility within a system. And so concrete is a great example of that. And then the last state, which is anti-fragile, anti being that it's the opposite of fragile, is a little bit harder to wrap your head around. And it was a huge insight to me when I read that book that I was teaching regenerative design, which is essentially the design of anti-fragile systems for the betterment of humankind. Now, let's dig into this concept of anti-fragile. So if I was sending you something to Germany and it was anti-fragile, so the label said anti-fragile instead of fragile, what would the subheader on that label say? So just to remind you, the fragile label said handle with care. And if fragile is opposite of anti-fragile, what would the subheader on that label say?
I don't know, like throw like smash me around or something.
Yeah, exactly. Apply volatility to this system. So anti-fragile systems don't resist volatility, they benefit from it. And in fact, when you remove volatility from an anti-fragile system, it actually gets worse. And so what's a good example of that? Well, the human body is the personal example I was referring to. If I sit on a couch for the rest of my days, my muscles will atrophy. They'll actually get worse. But if I want to improve my well-being, and we're seeing all of this amazing information come out about longevity these days. And when you dig into the longevity science, there's only a few things you can do to live a healthier lifestyle for longer. And it's actually, they're referring to it as health span, not lifespan. So lifespan is the number of years you live. Health span is the number of years that you live with a really incredible ability to benefit from health. So fasting, perfect example. So you stop eating for a period of time from anywhere from 16 hours to 7 days. That applies volatility to your metabolic system. And if you get into the science of fasting, after 7 days, your immune system is completely reset. Your ability to process insulin or deal with like blood sugars goes up. You end up with autophagy, so your body starts to consume the sick cells in your body. Another one is weightlifting. When we lift heavy weights, our muscles get bigger, so we have more receptors for sugar in our muscles. One of the biggest leading indicators of longevity is actually the muscle mass that you have going into as you get older. VO2 max, your body's ability to bring oxygen into its body, is a function of how many times and how hard you sprint. And you send yourself past the point of exhaustion, and then your lungs say, "Oh, that was a horrible feeling. I better make sure that I adapt so that I can take in more oxygen per minute than I was before." So the body adapts to volatility, and specifically the dose dependent volatility. That, like, if we go too far, if we lift too much weight, we can get herniated discs, can have hernias, we can tear muscles. And so every anti-fragile system has a dose dependency and if we stick within that dosage, then we are able to actually make the system stronger, make it more resilient. And so we can bring that concept out now into the 30,000 foot level, and say that ecosystems are anti-fragile. When we were describing resilient, I said that sidewalks will degrade with over time. They'll increase in entropy. Anti-fragile systems are the opposite of that, in that they're syntropic. And so they get more complex over time. They become more ordered over time. And it's the life force that ultimately is what we're describing when we describe an anti-fragile system. Life itself gets more complex over time if we give it the right conditions and the right dosage of volatility.
Super interesting. So I guess at the highest level of a system, when we're looking at, like, if we're looking at an ecosystem, we can assess for how it responds to volatility. Does it improve and respond and enhance through volatility, or does it, like, degrade? And you mentioned there the ecosystem example. It makes me think about, like, this term, like, well, this is actually a question. Like, where does the term regeneration fit into this? Like, that's often used to refer to ecosystems. What's the, I guess, two questions. What is a regenerative system, and how does that relate to anti-fragility?
So let's go back a few steps, and let's describe kind of three main paradigms. I think it's important for folks to understand. And so I like to think of the 20th century as like when humans really embraced the Industrial Revolution, and I'm going to call that the conventional paradigm. And we were very focused upon, like, increasing GDP, increasing production at any cost. And there was very little emphasis placed upon negative externalities. It was like our KPI was more revenue, more GDP, more employment. Um, and in a lot of ways, human well being flourished as a result of that. However, those negative externalities have started to build up, and we're starting to see them all across the planet. It's getting really difficult to ignore them now. So we have to kind of look at those a little bit through a different set of lenses. The next paradigm that kind of emerged in the late 90s, maybe even early 90s, was the sustainability movement. And its whole MO was to reduce human footprint. And I would argue it's not a very good goal. If you came to me at the beginning of today's call, or even right now, and you said, "Hey, Rob, how's your marriage doing these days?" And I said, "Oh, it's sustainable." You'd probably feel pretty bad for me. Like, nobody really wants to be in a sustainable marriage. And so I think the words that we use are really important here. And I think that especially when we're talking about an aspirational vision for humanity, which is what the sustainability movement was trying to aim at, what is it that we're sustaining? Are we sustaining degraded rivers? Are we, sustaining degraded ocean? Are we sustaining degraded soils? Sustainability, actually, in my opinion, is the end state, not the middle state. And so we can only really start to sustain things once we've fixed them up and brought them back to where they should be. And I think that the thing that's really dangerous about the sustainability movement is that it really emphasizes this concept of net neutrality, reducing human footprint, and things like landscapes like xeriscaping, when we cover the front lawn with rocks or maybe even fake grass. And the problem with those statements is that it has a negative connotation, which everybody probably on this call has detected on Facebook or whatever social you're on, X, which is that um, humans are inherently destructive. Like if you really kind of dig into what they're saying about, being vegan or reducing your footprint or any of these things, none of them in themselves are bad, but the underlying messaging is that at best humans can be less bad, and that's really really important. And I'm gonna give you a real world example on the opposite of that now, which is regeneration. And so regeneration is this idea that we actually do have a footprint. Newton got it right. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and trying to pretend that we can live without having a footprint is a false narrative. So if we have a footprint, what does it mean to make every footprint better than it was before we actually put our foot down? And let me bring that down into a less esoteric example. So I have two creeks on my farm, and since we bought this farm 5 years ago, the owner before us was killing all the beavers. We've stopped killing them. We have 8 very active beaver families on the two creeks that we steward, that kind of come through our property. And to the untrained eye, when we walk through our forests, when they come down to the beaver dam, these, like to the untrained eye, the forests around the creeks look like a complete disaster. Like there's trees everywhere, there's wood chips everywhere. There's these like crazy mud dams that are getting built in the creek. The water looks a bit murky. They're building channels out into these beautiful grasslands. They used to be fields. Now they've got these channels in there. And to the average person, they're like, oh man, the beavers are destroying this landscape. It was so beautiful before, and now they've destroyed it. The beavers have created a footprint. They've created disturbance. They've actually used their life energy to do these things. The KPI on the back end of a beaver dam is a 28-fold increase in biodiversity. And it's biodiversity, it's the number of meaningful connections between species that creates antifragile systems. That's where antifragility comes from, because if you've got lots of meaningful connections in biodiversity, if one of those species gets knocked out, the other ones will come in and fill the niche. And regeneration, in my opinion, is actually where we need to be as a species. And in order to do it, we actually have all the tools, we have all the knowledge to do this stuff. I'm sure there's more knowledge to be had. The hardest thing that we have to shift is our mindset. We have to actually shed the guilt of being human. We have to acknowledge that we have a footprint. And I think one of the reasons that people feel very disempowered right now is because the scale of problems that exist on planet Earth, like climate change or AI, or ocean acidification or soil erosion, they're so huge. It completely overwhelms you. And so we have to help people to understand the difference between sphere of influence and sphere of concern. There's a lot of things that fit into that sphere of concern. And if you focus too much on that, which is what social media will do, you forget about the part of your life that you can actually influence and change. That's the sphere of influence.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about uh the relationship there between like your land as you describe it and the beaver as a an inhabitant of that land, right? As part of that ecosystem. Like what you're describing is a disruption to the landscape that is having a positive beneficial effect on the overall health of the ecosystem. And it sounds like what you're saying is that like you're laying out an optimistic vision for the role of humanity in ecosystems that aligns us a little with the role of the beaver in a way, like a disruptor to an ecosystem that if we're mindful about how we're relating to the environment, we can actually have a positive impact, a disruptive impact, but a positive impact. And I guess bringing in the anti-fragility piece, if we're designing and operating within anti-fragile systems rather than like designing super fragile systems that break under disruption and volatility.
Yeah, we can be as positive as we are negative. So if the most negative thing we've done is build a nuclear bomb, why are we not envisioning what the most positive thing could be? And using our life force to uh, I mean, bring back a philosophical belief that the indigenous people of this land had prior to us, which is 7 generations thinking. Imagine a world full of people that are planting trees whose shade they'll never sit underneath. I mean, that's where we need to get to, um, and I believe technology can play a role in that. I don't think the problem with these conversations sometimes. I'm not saying we're going there, but although we could, it'd be interesting. Is there tends to be a lot of dichotomy. It's like nature or tech, humans or nature. And it's like those are false narratives. There's always a middle ground, and um, yeah, I could take that in a lot of different directions. But yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like there is this kind of there's a lot of nuance, right? Like it's not there's no simple silver bullet solutions to these challenges that humanity is facing. But I think you're coming down, you're bringing it back to a real fundamental uh, point about like our mindset. Are we optimistic about humanity's role in this, or do we see ourselves as like just harmful and nothing else? And I think that I like that framing. I guess what I would bring in here at this point now is like there are like the critique, if we can call it that, of the regenerative movement is that it's like it can get like super woo woo or like super like unrealistic, too philosophical. Like how do you respond to that? I'm sure you've heard that you've been you said you taught 10,000 people through Verge, right? I'm sure you've heard this on multiple occasions. Uh, so yeah, like how do you respond? And also, do you have any kind of uh, examples of this, either positive examples or negative examples, either fragile systems, anti-fragile systems that have really informed your learning on your journey?
So I would parse that a little bit in that. So for the last 15 years, I've been teaching permaculture. Um, and permaculture came out of the 70s and 80s. So very much the kind of the tail end of the hippie movement, if you will. And its original roots from Bill Mollison were actually very pragmatic. When you look at what Bill was proposing, a lot of the stuff that the VDAO is actually espousing are actually well documented in his writings, which is really interesting, just in a slightly different way. Regen, I think, is the next iteration of permaculture, or at least it's a more of an applied version of what Mollison was trying to get at. They're not quite the same thing, and I would actually argue that regen people, at least on the ag side of things, on the agriculture side of things, are very pragmatic. So if you look at folks like Gabe Brown, he's an industrial farmer that has wholesale adopted regenerative practices. He's using giant John Deere tractors. He's using seed from industrial seed cleaning plants to create his own cocktail cover crops. He's raising hundreds, if not thousands, of beef a year, pork, chicken, all on a fairly industrial scale, while enhancing soil organic carbon, water harvesting capability, nutrient density of the products. And he does actually occasionally use a herbicide. And so now all of a sudden it's no longer us versus, Bayer or Monsanto. It's like these are just we have to look at everything we built in the last 150 years. We're tool builders. That's what humans are. We build things. We create technologies um and he's just coming at it from a very pragmatic space and saying, here's the KPI that I want. Here's the tools that I have access to. Um, and all of these tools, by the way, whether it's Roundup or tractors or tillage equipment or planting machines or harvesting machines, these are just tools of disturbance. And I think it's really important because the word disturbance connotates has a negative connotation. But if we take like nature has no sentiment, let's just start there. Nature doesn't have um, she doesn't have sentiment. She basically has one metric of success, which is like how efficiently can I use the amount of energy coming onto the planet on a second by second basis so that no photon hits the ground. So it's trying to maximize. the amount of solar energy being collected per square meter of Earth. It's a solar collector. That's all it is. Um, and humans are we're tool builders. And so if we have a regenerative KPI, which is like better, more soil organic carbon, more biodiversity, more nutrient density, cleaner air, cleaner water, like those would be some of the things that we'd be aiming at, then why would we limit the tools that we can use to get there? And so where kind of the woo stuff comes in is very much we get very purist about what we can and can't do, um, and we kind of can lose the forest from the trees. And so you can end up with people kind of in the camp of like, well, I'm going to limit the number of tools that I can use in order to get to this outcome. And other people are less bothered by that, and they're just mad scientists. And there'd be good reasons not to use certain things, like if something is a known carcinogen, maybe we shouldn't use that. Or if we're going to use it, we should be a little bit more pragmatic or conscious about how we use that specific tool. But I've tried, and sometimes it's hard. I've tried to keep an open mind about GMOs and some of these other chemicals. I personally don't use them, but I haven't found a good use case or reason to use them because they're expensive. Um, but I do try and keep an open mind so that if there ever is a situation in the future where it is justified, I I'd like to think that I'd be open to trying an experiment using those tools.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is like it, it's context dependent, like the response to the system, if it's an agricultural system or another system, like it's context dependent. So it's not like we can be dogmatic about our approach. I don't know. I think i- if all you have is a hammer, every problem can look like a nail, right?
Hmm.
Whereas what you're describing is like a more nuanced and methodical and pragmatic approach to systems design. And you're talking about that reflected in the work of like Gabe, was it Gabe Brown you said?
Get brown, yeah.
Yeah, on in an agricultural context.
Hmm.
Um, I'm wondering if you've got any other examples of like where have you seen this anti-fragile systems design and regenerative systems design applied like in a really positive way?
Neil Spackman is a really great example of this. And so you can actually see his project on. I'll give you two examples. You can see his work on YouTube on the Albeida project. We can put a link in the show notes. And he used machines and design and in Saudi Arabia to harvest water coming off of a mountainside in order to regreen a chunk of desert that was growing nothing. And again, like from my early roots of wanting to move away from fossil fuels, here's a great example of how we use fossil fuels to change the geomorphology of a piece of land in order for it to change its relationship to water. And as soon as it changes its relationship to water, we can start the repair process, and it goes very quickly. Another really great example of this, less fossil fuel use, but is the Pani water project in India. I believe it's the entrepreneur from 5 Hour Energy. He made a pile of money, and he created a competition, and the villages actually started to compete against each other with regards to who could harvest the most water in the monsoon season. And they're competing for this prize. And so Andrew Millison has done a really great job at documenting all of these amazing water competitions happening in India. And so there's a smattering of these projects around the world. Another one is the Low S Plateau in China, hundreds of thousands of acres, regenerated using bulldozers and human labor to just change how water interacts with it. Until we have enough evidence and experience as a species to know that this is possible, we just haven't mobilized the will to do it en masse.
And how would you say like what's the role of digital tools in this space? Like in some communities, like you mentioned permaculture before, there might be a sense of like we need to go back to the land. We shouldn't be using digital tools. Like it's all has to be analog, and that's the way. That's the future. And then on the other extreme, you might have because we're like I guess we're VDAO and the green pill to some extent also. Like there's people that are like land stewards in the community, but there's also crypto natives in the crypto native kind of degen archetypes. Some people might be on the computer like 15 hours a day, reading charts, trading crypto, on Discord, fully living their lives online. So, and maybe they don't like hang out on farms and stuff. And so at these two poles, there's one pole where there's maybe a disconnect from the land, and then another pole where there's a disconnect from tech, and even a skepticism on both sides,
Totally.
around like what that means and so forth. How do you view that in terms of the relationship between digital solutions and real world solutions?
So about 7 years ago, I started reading anthropology books because I wanted to get a better sense of our roots, and obviously there's a lot of stuff that in prehistory that we don't have any clue about, and so there's different people are trying to piece together kind of what humanity might have looked like 10,000, 12,000, 14,000 years ago. And we're starting to get shards of what that looked like. But there are a few things that we can say with a fairly high degree of certainty. And I'm a very probabilistic thinker, so everything I say, I'm trying not to speak in absolutes because I think it's important, but because it opens up the possibility for more dialogue afterwards with other people that may have better answers than I do. But we know that, or we have a pretty good sense that we've uh, destroyed 50% of Earth's forests over the last 10,000 years. So we're about 50% less trees than we had 10,000 years ago. And the reason that we've destroyed those forests is actually out of self-interest to feed ourselves. So some anthropologists say that the human population got as low as 1,200 people after the Younger Dryas, and we were forced into agriculture. So that's when we started planting the first seeds in order to survive, because we weren't able to rely on hunter-gatherer techniques as a result of that last ice age. Humans over the last 10,000 years have followed the exact same pattern over and over again, which is deforest, plow, and desertify. So we cut the forest down, we burn them, then we use, in the past, animal labor with a plow. We turn the soils over. We plant versions of monocultures, single species type plants, so that it's easy to harvest. And then once we've exhausted that ecosystem's nutrient, we move on to the next one and we start the process over again. We cut those trees down. And because we've mineralized and extracted, we've basically mined the soil, um, those systems over time don't return. In fact, the Fertile Crescent, which is where kind of the cradle of humanity, is mostly desert now. The most fertile places described in the Bible are now deserts. And you just let that sink in a little bit. Um, and so when we look at kind of the agricultural stack over the last 10,000 years, it's basically being annual grains, livestock that you can train, basically, like animal husbandry and domesticated wild livestock. And it's kind of weird that we use the same agricultural stack everywhere on Earth, in spite of the fact that our bioregions are so different. Like I get to -40 here for 3 weeks a year, and then -20 for the rest of the winter time. And then at most we get to +20. Why am I growing the same species and trying to run the same systems, Northern Canada, that somebody in the Middle East is, like in Egypt, is trying to grow? There's not a lot of bioregionality. And so we've actually, interestingly enough, we've forced our species to genetically adapt in order to be in all these places. But the pattern that remains the same is deforest, plow, desertify. Now, coming back to your question, where does digital play into all of this? It's only in the last 75 years, maybe like the 1960s, let's say, maybe a little bit beyond that, but not much, since we've actually had the ability to send rockets into space and point cameras at Earth. And feedback is a super powerful tool, and it relies on our ability to actually, especially now, have digital technology that gives us rapid feedback. And in fact, I use that today. Like I wear a Whoop. Um, this is giving me real-time biometrics about my body so that I know I'm getting enough steps, I'm lifting enough weight, I'm getting enough cardio. I'm in the best shape of my life now because I have this incredible feedback mechanism which calls me out when I'm being lazy. So humans' ability to look back on our impact and the disturbance that we create allows for course correction. Same way that a speedometer makes sure you don't go over the speed limit, a gas tank makes sure that you fill your fuel tank up on a regular basis so you don't run out of gas. Digital technology has given us the ability to create dashboards to critique ourselves and optimize, not get rid of, but optimize our disturbance. And that's actually the thing that gives me the most optimism going forward is that we now have democratized, inexpensive data streams that we can deploy. And we know that humans change behavior when they're given the right information. So that's how digital technology builds into this space. The opposite end of it, so on the called the tech bros, or I don't know how you want to classify these folks, but the people that are like really far over into the accelerationists, maybe, and I'm not super versed on this. You'd be more versed than I will, but this is me coming from an ecology bias, looking in on some of the stuff that I see on LinkedIn. There's a quote from McDonough, which talks about how if I gave you a design brief on to design a piece of technology that self-replicated, um, generated biomass or sequestered carbon, produced oxygen, created food, created habitat, and did it without any labor cost, all on its own, without any intervention from humans, didn't need to be repaired by a mechanic. It had self-repair mechanisms. Um, go design that. And that's the tree. I don't think there's any piece of technology that we'll ever build that will compete with the capability of a tree. And so when I look at some of the like people trying to pump CO2 underground, and using technology to do that, it's like it already exists. And it doesn't it's cheap. I can buy seeds for pennies on the dollar. Um, and it doesn't require a company to be involved other than to put it into the ground and let it do its work. I think that there's an opportunity to stop trying to corner the market or patent a piece of technology that nature has been working on for 4 billion years. And so it's not tech or nature. I think there's a word that goes in front of the tech, which is like, what's the appropriate technology? How do we bring appropriate technology into the world? And how do we bring nature into that space as well in a way that honors, like, think about the trillions of experiments that nature has done over the 4 billion years. We will never be able to compete with that. Like it's just got such a long time horizon, even if it's been moving slowly. No matter how many MVPs or lean startups we create, we'll never be able to replicate it. So biomimicry is kind of the merging of those two spaces, and it's super exciting to see what those folks are doing.
So pretty interesting, man. And from what you described there, like you're reminding me a lot like this balanced approach that you described to what's essentially growth and like applying tech in a way that is meaningful and adds value. Like for example, the monitoring of ecosystems to help inform how we interact with them to enhance the ecosystems that we all depend upon. Like this reminds me a lot of Vitalik's blog post he wrote in like 2023, I think it was late 2023 on it was called like My Techno-Optimism, and that's where he introduced this concept of defensive accelerationism, where it's about uh, acknowledging that we need to grow and develop and accelerate technological advancement, but doing it in a balanced way that also takes account of like, technology can cause harm, and we need to be defensive in the way that we're approaching that. And I guess that brings in the concept of like if we're thinking about Vitalik, we're thinking about crypto, obviously with VDAO and that emerged out of Fifth World, we can come on to talk about that. But I just want to, before we go there, I want to touch on this concept of like decentralization. So we've talked about what anti-fragile systems mean to you. We've talked about a little bit about resilience and regeneration and how that fits into that picture. The final kind of high level concept I wanted to touch upon was decentralization. So, where does decentralization and decentralized systems fit into this picture around like antifragility and so forth?
So before I go there, I just want to add one last thing to the last statement we made, which was
Go
um,
ahead.
the reason that humans destroyed the Fertile Crescent was because the feedback mechanism was so slow. They didn't recognize, they didn't understand they lived on a planet. And then they didn't understand because
They didn't have Twitter.
they didn't have Twitter. Yeah. I mean, they didn't have satellites. And so for them, it was like they were just moving from one ecosystem to another. They didn't realize they were having these aggregate impacts on Earth. And so technologies allowed us to get that feedback mechanism quicker. That was where I was going with that. Decentralization, I mean, I would give all the credit of decentralization to nature. It's the ultimate decentralized self-organizing system that operates from the ground up. And at its roots, permaculture was aiming at a decentralized open source movement because, like, personally, if I had $1 trillion, or even a billion would be more than enough. Actually, I don't need a trillion. If I had $1 billion, um, I would just go out and do the water harvesting work and the forest planting and all of that stuff in as many places as I could for as long as I possibly could do it until I died. That's what my heart wants to do. But when I put my strategy cap on, and this is the thing that this was the point in my life when I moved from being an environmentalist into a humanist. Actually, when I first got involved in permaculture, I was definitely an environmentalist. I was an activist. I was mad at the world. I was mad at big corporate America and all of these things going on. It was such a, I was a victim. At the end of the day, I was a victim. And
I remember. Sorry, it just reminds me when you say this. I remember there's a YouTube video of you like gorilla planting a tree back in the.
yeah, yeah, still up
That is
there.
a
It's
kind of
great.
activism that I can support, man.
Yeah. Well, and that's a perfect
You may have
example.
been a
So,
victim, but at least you had some. That also looked like good fun as well, right? Just planting trees randomly in places.
well, I wasn't a victim then, or at least I was less of a victim than before I took my first permaculture design course. Because the essence of what permaculture states, and most people don't know this, like people think of permaculture as like organic gardening on steroids, or activism, or some sort of earth spirituality. It's none of that stuff. If you go back to the original intent that Mollison laid out, it's very, very straightforward. It's take responsibility of yourself and that of your kids. So stop blaming your problems on other people. If you're not perfect in your own little system, you have no right to criticize anybody else. And get your house and garden in order so that it shelters and feeds you. It's the ultimate form of decentralization. Wendell Berry said that when less than 3% of the population grow food, we lose democracy, because it's the fundamental energy source of humanity is food. And as we see the amalgamation of all of these corporations, like losing our ability to grow our own, now we're relegating the most important energy source to a small number of players, um, who can decide who gets to eat and who doesn't. That's a pretty scary situation to be in. And it's kind of similar. There's analogies to this in our money system and like where data is going right now. And so what I learned, one of the most important things that I learned, we talked about it earlier, is that everything gardens. So every species on Earth, whether it's the woodpecker or the beaver, manipulates their environment to better themselves. So the woodpecker plants pine beetles and pine trees, so there's more pine beetles, so that there can be more woodpeckers. And the Arctic fox urinates around its nest so that certain grasses grow, and they can actually propagate the voles that they like to consume. The beavers create habitat that actually encourages poplars to grow because that's the food that they like to eat. And beavers actually farm them. They actually do inventories of the poplars in the area, and they will carefully cut and consume them at the same rate that they're growing. So we have the right to be on this planet. We have the right to manipulate our ecosystems. Um, but I could spend the rest of my life planting forests, and if I don't teach humans the importance of the ecosystems that they live amongst, then somebody's going to come in right behind me and cut all these things down again. And so The most important climate change we have to focus on is the one between our ears. It's how we operate on this planet. It's our belief about where we exist within our ecosystems. Are we above it? That's the industrial kind of former conventional system. Are we below it? We're less than nature. We don't even deserve to be on this planet because we just destroy it. Or are we part of the community? Are we like mixed right into that web of life? And what role do we actually have to play on this earth? What's our role? What's our position? What can we give back to this community that we rely so heavily on? And so permaculture at its core is decentralization because it says that if we want to solve all these really big problems that we're worried about, like climate change and ocean acidification, soil erosion, we start right outside our back door. We start solving those problems in decentralized ways. And the way you scale a decentralized system is with millions of nodes. And so, what I love about the promise of crypto, and kind of one of the things that we're trying to figure out at Fifth World, is it has the ability, if we can figure out the formula, to create the rails to inspire an entrepreneurial revolution to regenerate planet Earth at breakneck speed. But we have to figure out how to get nature on the balance sheet. We have to figure out the tokenomics of all of that stuff, assuming it was some sort of a token system. I don't know. I mean, we brainstormed about this. We don't have a shortage of labor. We don't have a shortage of knowledge. I don't even think we have a shortage of money. Like we're seeing that we can just print as much as we want. I think we need a new vision. We need a vision of what humanity can aspire towards. I love what Elon Musk has done, at least the analogy of his vision of Mars. All he does is talk about Mars every single day. And he's like, humanity needs a vision to work towards. I think we need the same sort of vision that he's creating for Mars for our planet. And I think we need to figure out what he's figured out. He's figured out how to mobilize capital to get humans to Mars. We need to figure out how to mobilize capital on Earth in order to spawn the largest Earth renovation project ever.
I love it, and I love that you brought in there the connection between nature and tech, like building on the last part of the conversation about defensive accelerationism and decentralization, like nature as the ultimate decentralized system. But I'm curious. Let's shift focus on to Fifth World itself. You mentioned there, um, Fifth World's kind of uh, well, you can touched on the mission. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more and maybe give us some examples of your work within Fifth World, specifically around like I don't know. I'd love to hear some examples of this in practice in the real world. What you're working on with Fifth World.
So Fifth World's mission is the acceleration of the adoption of decentralized food, energy, and water, essentially. So where crypto is focusing on data and assets, so call it the bits, we are wanting to focus on the atoms. And right now, the expression of our work is primarily consulting. And so we work for individuals that want to see their properties embody this concept of decentralized food, energy, and water. Um, and so we'll typically show up on a property and we map out kind of the ecosystem DNA, essentially. So we try and understand what's going on the property. We want to know where the property wants to be. So if you walked away from this piece of land, what would it tend towards over the next 100 years? Because we can take 100-year repair cycle and we can shrink it down to 10 if we can understand where it wants to trend towards. And if we can understand the resources coming onto and leaving the property, things like water, things like dust, things like seeds, human labor, wildlife, fire, snow, all of these things, if we can understand all the natural resources that interact with that property, we can change, and I would say we can bend aspects of the property. So not completely transform it, but we can understand where we have the ability to intervene in really healthy ways. And we can accelerate that regeneration process from 100 years down to 10. I was just actually out at our flagship site in Kamloops, which is in the central BC. It's actually an inland desert, so it's very dry there. And about 5 years ago, we showed up on this property. The well was dying. There was very little water on the site. The client wanted to have the ability to feed 20 people indefinitely. Um, and I basically just said to Dave, who's actually one of Fifth World's co-founders, visionary thinker. I said to Dave, like, you can't grow food without water. It's not possible. Like, you're either going to have to truck it in large quantities, or we're going to have to figure out another solution. I think his well was producing zero 0.1 gallons a minute, so basically nothing. And the water coming out of the well had a ton of minerals in it. So if we had tried to irrigate crops with it, it would have caused all sorts of soil problems. So we devised a water harvesting scheme for him, which basically harvests all the snow melt coming off in the spring, which most people just let go to sink. We harvest about 1.5 million gallons of water every 2 to 3 years, depending on how the melt lands. Every spring is a little bit different. So some years we get water, some years we don't. And so we've created this huge reservoir of water on the property. So the water that we collect every 3 years, let's say, should last 3 to 5 years to irrigate all the systems we've put on there. We're growing food forests, which has been basically an orchard that is mimicked around a forest. We have 2 passive solar greenhouses that are growing uh, olives, feijoas, citrus, um, rosemary, guava, pineapple, banana, in northern Canada. It's crazy. So 2 tropical greenhouses. We have an annual garden there that grows an enormous amount of food. We've got a main crop garden, which grows all of his root crops. We have a low-tech root cellar that stores all of his food. He's just about finished building his microgrid. So this is a system that connects into the grid. It integrates batteries, generator, and solar. And BC is actually going to be having some sort of an arbitrage system coming up soon with their grid. So Dave will be able to not only have redundant power no matter what happens to the grid, but he can program these systems to export when the price is high and import when the price is low, which opens up a lot of really cool opportunities like heating buildings with Bitcoin miners, because you could then use your surplus energy to mine tokens, and then take the heat off of that to heat spaces, and all sorts of neat possibilities start happening with where the energy tech is going. And so that system integrates food, energy, and water in one unified system. Dave now has the ability to grow enough food for 20 people indefinitely. He can operate electrically indefinitely into the future. And his systems are designed to harvest water where he had none before. So we're now seeing regeneration of his well. We're seeing spring lines starting to open back up again after 5 years. And it's just literally beginning. And so that 100-year span is now rapidly moving towards that 10-year repair cycle. And these skills can be taught rapidly. The permaculture design course is kind of the DNA of that. Especially when you can take people through those systems and they can put their hands on them, they can see them, things start clicking really quickly. And what's crazy is that people want to be part of this stuff. Like the minute they see it, it's like, oh yeah, this is what I want. I didn't know I wanted it, but I want it now. I want to eat carrots that are sweet again. I want to see the deer return. I want to see the forest come back. I want to hear the bird song in the morning. There's an innate desire in people, and a lot of it's kind of asleep right now until somebody tastes it, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's super cool. I want to be part of that.
I love it. I love that, like, your vision is, like, super optimistic, right? Like, although I don't think you're being naive about the challenges that humanity faces, but it's there are ways we can respond, like shocks, disruption, disturbance, whether it's to the soil or whether it's to human systems at large, are likely to come. That's just part of what history shows us, right? But what you're describing is a system that can withstand those kind of shocks. And what would you say to someone that, like, was maybe living in a urban environment, like maybe renting a property or something? Like, in, are there different levels to which someone can approach becoming more anti-fragile and more resilient in their lives? And if so, like, what advice would you have to someone that was
Oh, so much
coming at it
advice
from a different level?
and so much hope, actually. So I get this question all the time. In fact, I post about, like, we work a lot on rural properties, and I do get some negative comments from time to time on LinkedIn from people saying, "Oh, that's just what the ultra wealthy can do." And it's like, no, that's not true. Um, so I left $300,000 a year in the oil and gas industry, and I lived in my mother-in-law's basement suite for 10 years. Um, and because I wanted it so bad, I wanted to move in this way so badly. It probably was a maladapted decision actually on my behalf. It probably would have been better to make more money and then build a really big demonstration site. Interesting to kind of contemplate those things. But anyways, that was the decision we made, and we are here today, which is great. So there's a guy working for us. His name's Adrian Buckley at Fifth World. He's in our design team, and he was one of my first students actually. Urban planner, had no didn't have two dimes to his name. In fact, he had a bunch of student debt, and he was so motivated by this that he jumped in with both feet. He was renting in a community in Calgary, and didn't have a garden, but just had to get involved. He had the same bug that I did, and this guy is like Johnny Appleseed. He's completely obsessed with apples. I have never met anybody more passionate about apples than Adrian Buckley. And so sometimes we get really obsessed with doing things, um, like having a vision in our mind to go and do something, and we don't have the resources to do it, and we ignore all the resources that are sitting right in front of us. And Adrian didn't have this problem, and so he started something called Calgary Harvest, and he built a little crappy little website. He took his cell phone GPS, and he started going around, and like every journey starts with that first step, right? We all want to scale up and do huge things right away, but we fail to forget that the scale up starts with a small step first. So in Sunnyside, he started walking around his community. Didn't even own a car, and which is a big thing in North America. And he started walking around Sunnyside, and he documented, I think, 5 or 6 trees on his website. And these were trees sitting in people's backyards that never got picked. The apples would fall to the ground. The homeowners were pissed off because they had, apple cider fermenting in their backyard. They had to go out and pick all these apples up. And he saw a market need. Literally, at the end of the day, that's what he saw. And so then he put out an email to the Verge Network and to the Calgary Permaculture Guild Network and said, "Hey, I'm organizing a community pick. We're going to give 1/3 of the apples to the homeowner, 1/3 to the picker, and 1/3 to the food bank." Well, it turns out most homeowners don't want the apples. They've eaten enough already. The food bank sometimes wants it and sometimes not. So the picker ends up getting this huge amount of fruit. Fast forward now, he's got a fairly sophisticated website. He's just finished his picking season. He has over 1,000 trees documented in Calgary that are not being picked. So it's a resource that's just waiting to be utilized. And he has a community of people that go out and pick these, and then they benefit from this food. Not only that, there's secondary benefits that come from this. They are starting to uncover genera or like species of apples that nobody's ever seen before. Because an apple seed from a Macintosh will not grow a Macintosh tree. All the Macintosh apples come from the same first Macintosh tree that was grown from that first seed. They always grow genetically diverse or divergent species. So we know how many seeds are in an apple, but we don't know how many apples are in a seed, because it just kind of that's how that species expresses antifragility. So now Adrian's starting to name these apples based upon the communities that they're in, and eventually he's going to actually start clipping the scion wood and propagating them as like uh, you know, Calgary apples that nobody has ever seen before. It's a super cool idea, and it could be replicated across every city. And so people get really depressed about not having their own garden or their own backyard to do this stuff in, but the city is your backyard, and somebody else is paying for that land, and they're paying to keep that apple alive. All you have to do is solve a problem for them, and you open up these opportunities for yourself. And there's a woman in Australia. She's a millionaire now. She started her business making quince jelly by doing the exact same thing that Adrian did. And so she never owned a tree in her life. And she leveraged the decentralized orchard. I can't remember whether it's Adelaide or Sydney or whatever. and built a business off other people's assets that they viewed as a problem. I think it's just a great story.
I love it. So I guess just before we wrap things up, I as you were talking, I remember something you said to me a year or two ago about like how when you're out there speaking or maybe on LinkedIn or whatever, you want to inspire the shit out of people, and you think like, we need to inspire the shit out of people because there's a lot of doom and gloom and fear and concern and even in many cases like conflict internally, externally, and that can create a kind of vibe that might be a barrier to inspiration, you know? And
Mm.
so what's your to kind of wrap things up, like if you were now at this point where you're at, if you wanted to inspire the shit out of people that are listening to this right now, like what is it that gives you hope and optimism looking like 5 years, 10 years out into the future? What gives you hope and what would you say to inspire the shit out of someone that's listening?
So I canoe quite a bit in the summertime, and I love river canoeing. And when you're going down a river, you're always looking for the line that you're going to take. And if it's a aggressive river, there could be hazards that you don't want to go over because you'll end up sinking your boat. And if it's a really aggressive river, if you sink your boat, you can get into a lot of trouble. And so you have to be aware of the hazards. But if you put all your focus and stare too long at the hazard, that's where your boat goes. So you also have to look for the pathways, and that's what makes canoeing really fun is navigating through that course and trying to figure out how to steer the boat in the right direction. And so all these hazards that are really depressing, we have to keep them in the periphery. We have to know about them. I think the problem with social media is that it takes it out of the periphery and it puts it like right in front of you nonstop. It's like you think about the word push notifications. It's like we don't need to be push notified about all the shit in the world. Every 5 seconds that it comes out, it's incredibly harmful on our body. And like coming back to the tech conversation we had earlier, 4 weeks ago, I started leaving my cell phone in my office, which is a 30-second walk from my home. And because I wear my Whoop, like I've put on tons of muscle. My VO2 max is going up. Like all these things are improving, but I've hit a bit of a plateau. And the last thing that I've been avoiding is my sleep. And I started leaving my phone in my office at night. And within the first night, my sleep score went to 100%. I was like, holy mackerel, like no idea that this blue light and the constant pings on Slack and text messages, and I don't even have social media on my phone, but just like that, the cortisol that comes from being constantly connected doesn't allow us the time to recharge. And I think it's really important that we're conscious ourselves of like our own well-being. Like we have to heal ourselves before we can heal the planet. And there's so much information available to us to do that. And once we're whole or starting to become whole ourselves, then we can start um, to fix the things around us. I think so. Like I said earlier, we have enough knowledge to fix this. We have enough money to fix this. If we just, as a society, decide we're going to direct the resources there, there's definitely enough labor out there if we really want to do this. There's enough examples of how this is being done around the world. We're not going to get there through fear. And I get scared too. I'm a human. I get these things concern me. I have two little kids, and I get worried about these things too. But we have to make a pathway that tastes better. It has to be more fun. It has to be better than what exists today. And I'm biased. I think that the way that I live is better than what we have today. I don't know that everybody's going to agree with that. I work pretty hard on my farm to do what I do, but we don't all have to follow the lifestyle that I choose to live. There's different versions of it. There's different iterations. There's different, like, Adrian's categorizing trees in Calgary. That's his version of that. And I'm growing a lot of my food on a farm. That's my version of that. I think we all tend to want to move towards these kind of physical expressions of it. I know that the Green Pill podcast is heavily biased towards the tech and crypto community. The hardest Gordian knot that we've alluded to in this podcast, in my mind, are the invisible structures of society. It's how we organize, it's how we create trust amongst each other, it's how we spawn a new vision of humanity, it's how we create cohesion in a world that is rapidly fracturing into tribalism. These are the invisible structures, and we can actually go back into nature. We can go into looking at how self-organizing systems, which is fundamentally what, like when I read crypto jargon, and I call it jargon because so many terms I don't understand. But like when I talk to guys like you or other people in our company that are crypto natives, you guys don't use all these words, and like there's analogies to the words you guys use in crypto to how ecosystems function. I mean, we're actually talking the exact same way. It's just you guys have sexier language than we do. And so my call to action for the green pill community is keep building, keep working on these invisible structures, figure out governance systems, figure out how to create cohesion amongst humans, and get outside into nature and start looking at the architecture that exists in these ecosystems and bring it into the way that you design your products and your tools. We're tool builders. You guys are building tools. I'm building tools. It's time that we start really doubling down on working together and figuring out how these two worlds can merge. Because I believe that there's a solution between these two worlds, and it just needs more exploration. And Kevin and I were driving, or we were just hanging out at the Kamloops site last week, and we were like, "Man, we should really talk to Kris and get a hackathon going around this idea." We were kind of brainstorming what that could look like, and it's definitely a conversation you and I have to have offline at some point. But we need to create more collaboration.
I love it. Real world builders hackathon. Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. I love that you kind of brought so much optimism to the conversation today, whilst also not skirting around the challenges and the fear that can elicit in all of us. And I think for me, just responding to change and uncertainty in a way that secures our resilience, our when it comes to like water systems, energy systems, food systems, seems to be linked very much to health. That's what I'm hearing from what you're saying. Health, security, and that enables us to move forward in the world and respond to some of the bigger challenges that humanity is facing. So it's inspiring. You have inspired the shit out of me. That's why I'm super bullish on Fifth World. But yeah, like just any final thoughts before we wrap things up? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's the health of tying into that health piece. If we want to be healthy, if we want to have long health spans, um, it's in our self interest to fix these systems. In fact, I would say that people working in this realm, whether you're trying to create the decentralized money system or data system, or the decentralized food, energy, and water systems, you can come at it from that's the right thing to do for the planet, or you can come at it from the most enlightened, self-interested people on earth are actually people doing regenerative design, because we're aware that our well-being is directly tied to the well-being of the ecosystems around us. And as a social structure, money is how we all interact with each other. Data is how we interact with each other. Water and nutrients are how trees do what they do. We need water and nutrients as well, but we also need to be able to communicate with each other. And I would argue that the decentralized money and asset system is just as important as the decentralized food, energy, water, and even ecosystem that allows us to operate on this earth. And until we do have another Mars base or wherever we're going into the universe, we should make sure that we've got our own house and garden in order, and make sure that spaceship Earth has the best chance of being able to continue to sustain human civilization. Earth will go on with or without us. I think that's the thing that people need to know. It'll just reboot and do it again. the question that we have to answer and collectively come to terms with is, do we want to be on the extinction list? Because that's where it's going if we don't change course. Or do we want to be a part of this ecological community for as long into the future as we can? That's what's at stake.
Thanks for a great conversation, Rob. It was great.
Thanks for having me.